Welcome to the Bella Vista Gardening TV show. I'm Geri Hoerner, and joining me today, I'm so excited to say, is Janet Carson. She's a retired Extension Horticultural Specialist with the University of Arkansas Extension Office, or Cooperative Extension Office. And she was the state coordinator for the Master Gardeners until she retired, 2 years ago?
Almost 3.
Almost 3 years ago. So the Master Gardeners has been so fortunate to have her as a leader for so many years, and she just did a wonderful job. We miss her.
Well, thank you.
It was great. And today we're going to be talking about garden inspirations from travel. Now, Janet also does travel tours, and she organizes these tours. And in 2019, you did the trip to England, and Beth Castle and I did that trip, and we did a show about that trip to all the England gardens in Chelsea. And they haven't had one since. They haven't had Chelsea since.
Yeah, they had one last year.
Did they have one last year?
They had it in the fall.
Oh, in the fall. That's why I missed it. But it was a wonderful trip. So anyway, but today we're going to be talking about inspirations.
Well, I think if you travel and you're a gardener, you need to visit gardens.
Oh, you do.
You learn so much. And it may not be that all the plants can be grown in your garden, but it gives you so many ideas. And I think it just broadens your horizons.
I love to steal ideas.
I know, me too, me too. And we started doing that right after we started the Master Gardener program, and we went, short distances. We went to St. Louis for a long weekend and what have you. And then people started saying, well, when can we go to England? So that was the first international. And now that I'm retired, I'm going to try to do 2 or 3 a year.
I have to see Monet's garden, so put that on your list.
We've done it.
Put it on your list.
I'll do it again.
Anyway, and then we're also going to talk about upcoming events and what to do in your garden. So the first thing I want to do is thank the Creeks Nursery for sponsoring our show. We really appreciate them, and they've got a great selection of products and supplies. So also, we want to talk about the Bella Vista Garden Club plant sale. They had the first plant sale in April with coleus and tomatoes, and then the big plant sale is going to be on May 21st, 22nd. So, and that's at the Village Wastewater. So there's more information on the website. You can go to the website. And then the Benton County Master Gardeners will have their spring plant sale and expo. That's May 20th and May 21st. So you go there first, then come to ours next. So anyway, it's Saturday, Friday and Saturday, 8 to 1. So anyway, the Benton County Expo is like their 8th year they're doing it.
Well, and it's a great way to find plants that work in your area for
yeah.
both of those sales, because they're obviously tried and true, or you wouldn't be propagating them and selling them.
Right. So it's a great, and we are trying to do more native plants too. So those are good. So anyway, we're here to talk about traveling and inspirations you get when you travel.
Okay.
So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Well, we're going to show a little PowerPoint here, and I'm going to show you some pictures of some of our tours that we did and some of the things that I feel like are really helpful when you go gardening, and why it's important, I think, to try to get out there and travel. So, when we go traveling, we've done many different modes of transportation. You can see the most fun was down in Panama, down in that bottom corner there. We got to this place and we had been told we were going on a boat tour. Well, we're expecting a boat, and this is a dugout canoe. And people were like, I'm not getting on that thing. But we had a great time going there and learning from the natives there in Panama and seeing what plants they had. But when you're traveling these days, if you've been traveling anywhere, you know that patience is a must, especially with air travel. And you've got to go with the flow. The things will be there when you get there. You can learn so much about plants. There's lupins there in the top right is one of my favorite perennials. But of course, we don't do very well with lupins in the South. But you can still enjoy these plants. But that astrantia there in the center, we did see when we were in England, and it does well in our shade gardens. And I'm growing an edible olive on my deck in a large container, and I actually get about 15 to 20 olives now, and it's surviving the winter that we've had, the last 2.
On your deck?
On my deck in a large container.
Wow.
You can also learn not just about the plants, but how to organize them, how to arrange them. Do you want a formal garden, or do you want a more rustic country English garden or something? So that's another method that we can look at. And I think our picture just went away.
Yeah.
So we'll maybe get it back. So there you can see some of the different ways of doing pruning or organization. You can learn about tropical plants. Now these plants might not overwinter for us outside, but we can grow them in containers. We can move them inside for the winter.
They'll be in our garage for the winter.
I mean, plumeria, you can pretend you're in Hawaii. I mean, it does very well for us. So we can try some of these plants in different ways. Now, those are all rhododendrons. Now, you know
Wow.
that all azaleas are rhododendrons,
Right.
but not all rhododendrons are azaleas. But these were some, and look at the clusters of the blooms.
So different.
I know, that was those were all taken in New Zealand. But that plant, we've seen it in several gardens in the Great Britain area, and people are going, what is this? What is this? But you know, in England, all of their plants are labeled by Latin name, not the common name. So they thought this was some rare, obscure plant. That's poke salad. And
Oh
they
my
grow
gosh.
poke salad, which is a weed everywhere in our gardens, and they're growing it as an ornamental. And look at those fabulous spikes of blooms and berries.
Yeah.
So, you know, sometimes, what is a weed? A
So we
plant out
kill
of
that
place.
plant before it blooms, and we
No,
don't
we
know
don't.
it.
We do let it bloom,
Do
but
we?
you know, birds will eat the seeds, and that's how we've got more of it.
Yeah.
So that's a good plant too. So let's go back. This was in Holland at Keukenhof.
Oh,
If you've
my
ever been,
goodness.
that's, you know, they open that park for just 1 month out of the year, and it is loaded with bulbs. So getting ideas for how you can use those bulbs. This was in St. Louis at the Botanical Garden. So think about all the seasons. You know, one of the things I was talking about today in the Garden Club talk was we don't want a one-season wonder. You don't
Right.
want everything in bloom in the spring and that's it. Those are both fall shots. And so how you can have color in every season is another thing you can learn. If you're out in California, you can go to the home of Luther Burbank, and he developed a lot of new introduction. In fact, I don't know if you can see it real well on the bottom, but that's that opuntia, the big cactus plant that
Oh, yeah.
can be a weed. But he developed one that doesn't have any spines. It's completely smooth. But then he
Wonderful.
had artichokes growing in the garden. But you can learn history when you're out in the garden as well.
Right.
And then some of the different pruning techniques. This is down at Callaway Gardens, and we took a group of gardeners there, and you know, they have ornamentals and they have the inside, you know, covered place, but we were one of the few groups that wanted to spend a lot of time in their vegetable garden and their fruit garden. But that's a muscadine vine over here, a grapevine underneath that bench, and then they had another grapevine growing around, just espaliered on a building. So you can
my
find
goodness.
different ways to grow the same plants you might be growing at home. And then, you know, we hear a lot about crepe myrtle in Arkansas.
Oh, yeah,
and
we see a lot of it.
We do. Well, that's their version. It's called pollarding there at the bottom, and that you'll see a lot of that in Italy, where they cut these trees that severely, but they believe in that being a way of making a shade tree and keeping it small. Oh, I think we keep going back and forth. I guess I didn't realize. So here you see, this is down in Italy. That's at Lake Como, and if you've never been to Lake Como, it's one of the most beautiful spots in the world, I think. It's just gorgeous. But those are what they call plane trees, which is a variety very similar to a sycamore, but a little bit smaller leaf. But they've got that wonderful variegated bark like a sycamore. But you can see these are at nurseries. You see the framework that they've got there, and they're actually training these trees. So they're outside seating, and it's like an umbrella. So they'll
Wow.
get enough. Now they're ugly probably during the winter months when there's no leaves, but when there's foliage on, it's pretty interesting to see.
They make it an art farm.
They do. Now, this is some cottage style gardens. That one is Helen Dillon. If you remember Helen Dillon from Ireland, she's a well-known horticulturalist. That's her. But these are lots of different styles, and we can think about plants how we can incorporate those perennials into our
Now,
own
is that a
garden.
Roseanne?
That was a geranium.
Roseanne geranium?
Well, I call it a
Perennial?
crested geranium or whatever for the garden. Now, these are all the bottom three. Well, the bottom two on the right is Doubtful Sound, in New Zealand, which is absolutely stunning. Talk about the sound of silence. But then there's the Grand Canyon, there's the Alaska cruise that we did. You know, we took 1,000 people on an Alaskan cruise. We had our International Master Gardener Conference on that.
Right.
And that was a great way to get people to learn while they were inside, but then we did garden tours and things when we landed in the different cities. And then there can be some grand designs. You know, that's my yard in the top left.
Oh, right.
That's one of the castles that we saw down in Scotland, and they're just stunning. The one in the bottom is actually in New Zealand. And so I often use that in my slides, and I'll say, so how many people you think maintain that? That was one section out of 4. 3.
3 people
One
maintain
man
that whole
who was
thing.
my age, and then his parents. Now he was in his 50s at that time, but they planted the right plants so that they weren't
So
a
very
lot of
little
maintenance.
care.
And they had
Yeah.
very mild climate there in
Yeah,
New Zealand
that's
as
true,
well.
that's true.
And then the one on the right, that's in Dallas, Texas. You know,
Wow.
so you can see it doesn't have to be New Zealand or Vietnam, but you can do different things. But you also get to experience where our food comes from. You know, that on the left is chocolate. That's the cacao. That's the pod.
Really?
And you know, we went through a chocolate factory in Costa Rica, and they let us. We tasted the nibs. They're extremely bitter before they turn them into chocolate. But we had an entire meal made from chocolate, and some were savory and some were sweet. But it was wonderful. And then coconuts. You know, we saw coconuts and how they would cut it down and drink the water out of it,
Right.
and so that can be fascinating. We try to make it to farmers markets when we go on tours.
They are amazing in these foreign countries.
In Europe, it's amazing, all the flowers. You know, you can stop and take a bouquet of flowers home, but some of the different varieties of tomatoes that we don't necessarily see here that you'll find. Now, this was probably the most unique farmers market I've ever been to. This was in Vietnam. We took a group and we were on a river cruise down the Mekong Delta. We went to Vietnam and Cambodia. And when they talk about fresh, let me tell you, they had like kiddie pools with fish in it that were still alive. They had eggs that were hatching. You see those fresh eggs down there? Chickens were coming out of them. But they had some very interesting fruits and vegetables in them.
We don't see those.
And
we probably never will.
And we probably never will. But this was the one. This was the section of, do you have any idea what those are?
No.
Those are all insects, fried.
Oh, my.
Fried tarantulas. That's frogs
Maybe
down
it's a
there at the
good
bottom.
thing we won't have
Well,
to see 'em.
and we were at this market, and our guide said, now, I don't recommend any of you eat these tarantulas. And I went, I don't think you have to warn us about that. I don't think there's a problem. And he said, well, and somebody said, but are they good? And I said, yeah, they taste like chicken. But he said they're very good if they're fresh.
Yeah.
But these, you don't know how fresh. But those were cockroaches, grasshoppers, crickets.
Well, they are protein.
Oh my gosh!
You know.
But we did not try it. But it was an experience. We have done many coffee tours where we actually saw the coffee seedlings. When they're young, they need protection from the shade to get a root system established. Then they move them out into the fields, and we saw them harvesting the red berries, how they roast them, and you know, that is fascinating.
Yeah.
We've seen that in several countries, but Costa Rica in particular. You know, one of the things, we're starting to eat more grains and things in our diet. Well, quinoa, have you ever seen quinoa growing? That was in a garden in England. And then some of the different ways that they would trellis their plants.
Oh, yeah,
and they're
up the side of the hill.
protecting some of the plants from late frosts or from insects. Fruit production, we've seen some interesting, that's a persimmon there in the center, but the bottom left is actually a quince. You know, when we think of quince, we think of the ornamental flowering quince, but this is one of the quince that's almost like a pear. The jujubes, or the Japanese, or we call it the Arkansas dates. That's a jujube tree in the right there. And then we've seen pomegranates growing all over the country, or all over the world, I should say.
Yeah.
We have been, there's Chelsea up there at the top, but we saw so many displays of flowers. But we've been to cut flower farms where they were actually protecting the stems. You can see the grading there with the netting where they're letting the plants grow through to keep the stems sturdy and straight. And then putting the little netting around the blooms to protect them, to keep them opening or tearing apart when they're doing the harvesting.
Yeah.
rock gardens, which you guys could benefit from
yeah,
this
we
up
have
here.
a lot of rock.
Learning about some of the plants that you can grow in rock gardens and how to make them attractive. You can see the sedums there on the right, but both of these pictures we took in Canada. And then water features.
Oh,
You know, you can go as simple as this little, just half,
Fountain you buy, yeah.
well, it's just what I'm trying to say, the cask, the wine cask, the kegs, they've cut in half and lined it with a liner and have it as a water garden.
Yeah.
You can be as elaborate of those giant water features in the center, but there's lots of ways to incorporate that sound of water in the garden.
That is so soothing.
It is, but they're a lot of
is.
work for the big ones, I'll tell you, because
The
I
big
have
ones
one.
are a lot of work.
And then containers. We see more and more people growing in containers. And if you think back into the, 60s and 70s, people would have a pot of geraniums and everything was an individual pot. Well, today, look at the containers. That top one is in Salt Lake City. Those containers are concrete and they're probably 8 feet across and they're full of soil. But you got to think, the larger the container, the sturdier it needs to be, because wet soil is heavy. But that was really, Chicago does a great job downtown with containers and flowers. They really try that beautification, and but then sometimes the containers don't work. I don't know if you noticed that top left one. That was in Texas. They had taken old coffee cans, or the cans that the vegetables and stuff came in, and attached it to a wall. Well, a coffee can is going to get small. It's hot. The tin's going to build up heat. It was very difficult to keep those watered, so they ended up not doing well. But sometimes you can learn more from your mistakes than you can from your successes.
Yeah, you know what not to do again.
That's right. So let's see what else we've got here. And then indoor things. That's down there, that's Callaway Gardens inside their greenhouses, and they have it beautiful all the time. But even if you go to Las Vegas, we had an International Master Gardener Conference in Las Vegas, and those were inside the Bellagio. They are beautiful displays. I'm not a big gambler, but I loved and was fascinated by all the flowers and things you can see.
And then you got like the Jewel Box in St. Louis
That's
too.
right.
Always has flowers.
That's right.
Different flowers.
And then, go to some of these shows. We had a large flower and garden show in Little Rock forever, the Arkansas Flower and Garden Show. And I would make a point to try to go to other events across the country or the world. If you've never been to Chelsea, it is the primo. Philadelphia has a good one too.
That was my lifetime dream. And
Chelsea's fabulous, but so is the Hampton Court Show, which is a little bit later in the year, and we've done both with our garden tours. And how they put together their arrangements of flowers and vegetables is absolutely
But they do it so
amazing.
quickly, and then they tear it all down. And it's
Well,
just
those
amazing.
outside gardens, and the thing is, for those, it's an honor to be chosen to do it. And not everybody gets in, but we struggle to get people to do it here in the States because they say it's easier for somebody to come to their garden. But so let's see what else we got here. We've taken tours through wetlands to see what's going on in those areas. That was down in Alabama. We've done some of the arid environments. I mean, I am not a huge cactus fan, but when we went to the Las Vegas meeting, that was one of the garden tours. We've seen wind tunnels where they're talking about different ways of using wind for energy. We've done hot weather, so we've been to pineapple farms and we've seen the banana plantations. That was in Panama down there at the right. We've learned different cultures. We've eaten outdoors before. We've also taken tours to very cold climates. We did Doubtful Sound in New Zealand was extremely cold, but we've done the Alaska trips. They were chilly. And, even sometimes in Scotland, when we went in the summer, we hit some pretty chilly days. So when you go, we try to think about what the weather's going to be like, but we're pretty, gardeners are tough people.
Yeah.
And they're going to go, if it's hot or cold, or if it's wet or dry, they're going to be out there in those
And we
gardens.
usually live longer than other people
That's
too.
right. That's right. So we do not stop, because you can see we've done the rainforest down in Costa Rica. When one of our tours to Hampton Court Show, it poured down raining. There were umbrellas everywhere, but it didn't stop us. We were in Scotland, and some days it would be rainy, but people would just put their rain gear on, and we were at Balmoral Castle in Scotland with the Queen's gardener. He's out there giving us the tour. So, and that's one of the other things. Our trips aren't cookie cutters. This was in Texas on the left. These people created a hobbit house. They actually built their house to look like a hobbit hole. very strange, but they, you know, for them, they loved it. And that was over in Ireland. We went to, at the Blarney Stone Castle, beneath the Blarney Castle is a poison garden. Everything in the garden was poisonous.
Oh my goodness.
And they were telling people about poisonous plants. So, you know, that's pretty unusual. You probably wouldn't want to do that at home. No. In Holland, you can see the tiny little bitty gardens that they have in front of their homes or their window boxes that are spectacular. But then you can see the fields of tulips. And, you know, it was amazing for us to see those large scale. And they're out there with tractors cutting them because they're trying to grow bulbs, so they don't let the flowers, right, because the flowers are taking energy away from the bulbs. By cutting them early, they put that energy back into the bulb. And then we toured the flower market, which was one of the most fascinating things to see. It looked like little matchbox cars all over these acres of floor space that are carting around huge containers of cut flowers that are going all over the world. And these guys are sitting in front of monitors, you know, learning to recognize they're selling all these flowers in lots. It was amazing. And, you know, that's something you'll never see anywhere else.
Well, even flying over like the Netherlands, you can just see, you know, from the air, all the different plots,
I know.
squares, you know.
It's just amazing. It really, I mean, that's something you'll never see unless you go over there.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see this next one, I think. The other thing is we typically do get the owner of the garden or the head gardener that actually gives us the tour. Down there at the bottom, McGill has been our guide 4 times in Costa Rica and Panama. He's led National Geographic tours. You know, and if you're from Costa Rica, it's very different than anywhere else. He would be driving down this bus and we see this plant on the side of the road, and the bus stops and he gets off and he goes and he harvests something and brings it on, and or we all pile off the bus to go look at this plant or whatever that's growing on the roadside. So
it's very personal.
But you do develop a relationship with these people. I still talk to McGill, you know, every month, and we talk to some of our other travel agents and guides that have done it. But it's nice that you're learning from the experts. You're not just going through and you really
you can go walk through a garden and you don't even know what you're looking at unless someone
Especially if they're
explains it.
plants that are not familiar with.
You don't know.
And you know, I know a lot of plants, but I don't know every plant in every country.
You can't, really.
I mean, there's no way.
No.
So there's lots of different ideas. Those little cloches that you see there on the top, those were to put over asparagus or other plants to blanch them, to turn them white.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so that was in England. Then they had for their boots, instead of bringing them in the house, they had this right outside or in their mud room, these little pegs for you to put your shoes on so that you didn't track it all through the house. So lots of different ideas that you'll learn. And they do have problems with animals as well in their gardens. And you can see from elaborate covered gardens to just little fencing. You know, they just took that and covered their tender seedlings to protect them. But then sometimes you'll see some things that are pretty bizarre. That was just broken crockery. They would go get, or if they broke a plate, they used it as edging in the garden. Or they took glass and added it into their edging of their beds. And that one in the center, they made this waterfall sculpture with used mason jars.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
I've seen a greenhouse that was built from 2-liter Coke bottles. I mean, so you really sometimes see some pretty odd things, but they're clever.
But it's very unique.
That's right, and you're learning. I think when you stop learning, you die, is what I think. So being able to go and experiment different things other places, I think, is a great thing.
Yeah, it is.
And then creative. So that was a garden. These are all in Texas, and this people, they were tearing up their driveway, and instead of just getting rid of the old driveway, they somehow created pathways. So instead of stepping stones or flagstone pathways, it was flagstone.
Well, we had a neighbor in St. Louis that tore up their driveway and they used it for a wall, a retaining wall in the back of the house.
Well, that one on the right, that was not a great, you know those bed liners or those things they put in the back of a pickup truck that are silver? Well, that's what they were using for pathways in this one garden. Well, they would be hot in the summer, and I would bet they'd be slick if they got wet. So sometimes those ideas might not work as well as some of the others. But again, they're creative. Okay, then we've got, this was both of these shots were in Wales, but these guys were edging the lawn with hand scissors and trimmers. they don't like tools. They didn't like the motorized weed eaters and things because
So it's all by hand.
well, because this was at a castle, and it would have interfered with the noise quality inside. So they're out doing individual clipping with. That's more work than I would do.
Oh,
and this man
absolutely.
on the right, that was at the Lost Gardens of Heligan, he's out there, and he's got the boards there to walk on so that he didn't compress the soil if he's walking on bare soil, but he's got a line. So he's got one at one end and one at the other because he wants that row of vegetables or flowers to be perfectly
Everything
linear.
straight. Yeah.
Again, that's not something I would do, but it's interesting to see
But
people
we did
that,
see that in England too.
Yeah.
When they have crisscrosses, they'd take the lines and crisscross, and they'd follow and plant their annuals in those lines.
very
and it was
specific.
Really,
which-
really
which
pretty.
I'm not going to go there.
But it's labor intensive.
I know.
Yeah.
Make it a little easier on yourself, I think.
Yeah.
And then we have learned a lot about new cultures. This was in Panama. Remember I showed you those dugout canoes? That was us going, and we ate with our hands. That was the natives out there. So they were showing us their communal dance at the end, and they brought one of our master gardeners out there. She was 6 foot tall, one of the palest white people. She's out there with all these natives dancing. We loved that. It was great fun. But we got to see them in a garden in Italy restoring the statuary. That was a graduate program. They were out there painstakingly restoring the statuary that was out in the garden in that one shot as well. So you know, you're not just learning about plants, but you're learning about what's important to people
And the
how they
culture
and how we're all unique in our own way, but how in some ways we are alike.
Yeah, that's true.
And so, and we went to that was in Cambodia or Vietnam, on the people living on the water down there. That was interesting. And there, you know, we've made candy down in Costa Rica. When we were in New Zealand, we actually did a farm stay. They divided our whole group up, and we each stayed with different families. And we went on a sheep roundup in a minivan.
Oh my goodness.
But we ate with the family. We learned about their culture. That was really kind of fascinating. And everybody had different experiences because you were all with different families.
Different people.
So we did that for one night, which I had never heard of before either.
That's unique, really unique.
Some people were a little bit worried, I think, at times. You know, butterflies have been huge. There's butterfly gardens all over the world, but there's also businesses where they're raising butterflies to send them to butterfly conservatories, or there's now people that instead of throwing rice after a wedding, they're releasing butterflies.
Yes.
So you can, you know, we learned about that. We've gone through the rainforest and seen a lot of interesting things there. We've seen volcanoes in many different climates. We've learned about a lot of the wildlife. The sloths came up right up close and personal with
Wow.
us. We were down in the rainforest, and the guide stopped. He goes, "Look, well, if we'd have been flying down the water, that's just a whole row of bats that were overwintering there." And then the poison dart frogs we would see.
Oh my goodness.
We've seen monkeys. We've seen, you know, just out in the wild. It's pretty fascinating. You know, I think gardeners often like animals and cooking too, so that kind of goes hand in hand.
Yeah. We like the animals that don't destroy our gardens.
We've
so.
seen the lambs. We've seen the little turtles that have hatched and gone back into the wild. There's the monkeys when we were in Cambodia. They would just come right up to you. So I think there's always something to learn. This is down at the Dallas Arboretum. You know, the caladiums clustered in the shade, but using crotons, which is a house plant. It's great color in full sun. Different styles of landscaping as well, different arches with annuals. That's just the Confederate jasmine there on the wall. Different types of styles. So the gunnera, we've seen that in so many. There's Monet's garden down there in the bottom right.
Yeah.
But we also make a lot of new friends. When
Yes,
you
we
travel
do.
with somebody for weeks at a time, you really get to know a lot about them. So, and our bus drivers, one of them stopped on the side of the road and cooked tea for us.
Oh, for heaven's
I mean,
sake.
they're just fascinating people. So you learn so much from other people. The food as well. You know, we eat things that like haggis. Not so bad if you eat it in Scotland, but not so great over here. So we've seen lots of different fruits and vegetables, different types. Now, I'm not going to say we've never had a problem. We've had a bus that broke down. We've missed a flight because flights got canceled. But one of our gardeners that used to go with us, she passed out those stickers at the beginning of every trip and said, no whining.
No whining.
Because you just got to get along, go with the
Yeah.
flow, and things
Right.
will get better. But we also have a lot of fun. Gardeners are great people to travel with. And if you're not having fun, you're not learning either.
Right.
And it's always great to come home and
Yeah,
see what's
it is.
happening in your own garden.
And you can steal those tricks and those, the way they plant and what they plant. You can steal those
I know.
ideas.
It's just,
I do.
so I strongly encourage, if you're not a traveler, or even if you are a traveler and you don't go to a garden when you go, I try to always find something
Find a
when I
garden.
go
There's
someplace.
always a garden somewhere close to where you're traveling.
That's right.
Always.
That's right.
Yeah.
So it's fun. And I know that you've traveled with me. You need to go again.
I know, I do. So, and I will.
Oh,
and
good.
I will. So, but that's something to think about whenever you're traveling. Just, plan some gardens in there.
Well, and learn about the
And
culture.
if your husband doesn't like them, just leave them at the bar, and then you go to the garden. So,
What you could go to a winery and he could have a glass of wine.
Yes, true. There's always a way.
That's right.
Yep. Well, that was just a great program,
Well,
and I
thank you.
think we also need to talk about what to do in your garden for the month of May. And if you have to, you got to get your mulching finished, and because you'll be sorry if you don't, because hot weather will come. And the bedding plants should be put in probably mid-May here.
You can start.
You know.
I mean, you can start gradually transitioning, and you've got through. But you can buy them through June. I mean, you can still plant.
You don't have to rush out and buy them in February, March. So, and the herbs, you can't really do basil out there till it's at least 50 degrees at night. Are you going to be replanting, or it's just going to sit there? It's not going to grow.
Right. Tomatoes too.
And tomatoes, you got it. And you need to plant your tomatoes deep, because they'll put roots all the way
They're
up
one of the
that
few
stem.
plants that you can bury in the ground and they'll still grow.
Yeah, they'll grow well. So, and the bulbs, like I said, we talked about that earlier today, is you have to leave the foliage on your bulbs for at least 6 to 8 weeks after they bloom,
That's right.
because that feeds the bulb.
And if you cut it off too soon, they're not going to flower as well the next year.
No, they won't. And you got to finish moving your perennials and dividing your perennials this
Well,
month.
that's the ones that bloom in the summer or the fall. If they bloom in the spring, leave them alone until fall.
Right. But your hostas and things.
Daylilies, yeah.
Yeah, daylilies. And then the lawns need at least an inch of water a week. And try to leave them at 2 to 3 inches. Don't cut it too low.
Well, it depends on what kind of grass you're growing. Because up here you grow some cool season grasses that we don't grow in the southern part of the state. But if you're growing warm season grasses, let them totally green up and then start your fertilization.
Yeah, we don't fertilize till they're totally green. So, and the roses, you have to watch for the aphids and the fungus.
And Japanese beetles up here, which we
Well,
don't have.
we don't have as many the
You
past
don't?
few years.
Oh, that's good. We're
We
starting to
have-
see some in Little Rock.
I've been very surprised. I've seen very few in the past few years. So I don't know if that 17 degrees below zero got them or what, but
It might be good.
it might be. So, and then trees and shrubs, you can still plant trees and shrubs in the spring. Watch the water. You have to make sure they get enough water. And the vegetables. I'm not a big vegetable person. I know you grow vegetables
I do it
year-round
all.
all the time and cook them. But what are you planting now?
Well, right now I'm getting ready to plant. I bought some tomato plants, but I have lettuce and spinach and onions and potatoes and kale growing right now. They have been growing for a while,
Yeah.
but now I'm getting ready to start put the warm season stuff in.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if you want more gardening information, you can go to the Master Gardener website. That's BentonCountyGardening.org. And then the Bella Vista Garden Club has a website, bellavistagardenclub.com. They all have wonderful information there. You can find out anything you need. And you can Google, what did we do without Google?
I know. What do we do without computers?
We Google everything. So, but thank you so much for
Oh, it
coming
was
today.
delightful.
I really enjoyed it, and I'm hoping you'll come back one of these days when you're.
We'll do it. And
when
I hope
you're,
you travel with me again.
Oh, I will. I will. And your blog is, or your
Planet Janet, but it's through Arkansas Online. So if you just type in Plan It Janet, you'll find it.
You'll find it, and then you'll find out about your trips.
Well, and we were planning to put it on the blog after I have a travel list, and so I send it to them first. Well, they're selling out so fast right now. We sold out in 3 hours our last trip.
Oh my gosh.
And so we actually opened a second, so I'm doing the first group from Monday to Friday, and the second group's flying in Friday when the first one flies out, and we'll come home on Tuesday.
You had to double it up.
Well, because people are ready to travel,
They
I
are.
think.
They
I
are.
think that's what it is.
So, and I'm ready too. So we'll have to plan a trip. So, but thank you again
You
for
are
joining
welcome.
us. And I hope you've enjoyed the show. And And tune in next week and until next month, I mean. And until then, don't forget to stop and smell the roses.
Happy gardening.